The midnight wind drifted through the valley, carrying a hint of cold as it brushed past the mansion standing by the lake. The towering iron gates remained tightly shut. The fountain in the courtyard had long ceased to flow, and only the neatly trimmed roses cast fragmented shadows under the dim garden lights. The entire estate was swallowed by darkness, so silent that it seemed as if no one had ever lived there. The owner of this mansion was Carl Winston, a billionaire entrepreneur, founder of a charitable organization, and a frequent guest in political and business circles. His life was legendary, rising from nothing to become an industry leader. His name was almost synonymous with success. Yet on this very night, he lay lifeless on the floor of his study, his chest slightly sunken, his face ashen, as if he had suffered some sort of agony before his final breath. At dawn, a housemaid discovered his body and, horrified, dialed the emergency number. The police arrived swiftly and conducted a preliminary examination. The doors were locked, the windows intact, and there were no obvious signs of struggle. The deceased was still clutching an extinguished cigar in his hand. The initial medical assessment pointed to a heart attack. After all, Winston was in his 60s, a heavy drinker, and not in the best of health. However, Detective Stevens, assigned to the case, sensed something unusual. He scanned the room. This study, once luxurious and orderly, now appeared almost too neat, as if someone had deliberately cleaned up. And on the dead man's face, though stiff, there remained a faint trace of indescribable fear. Was this truly just a case of natural death? The investigation ahead might uncover secrets that were never meant to be known. Subscribe to the channel and don't miss the rest of the story as we unravel the truth behind this mysterious death. If Carl Winston's life were broken down into pieces, he would undoubtedly appear to be a perfect man. He was a business mogul, a model philanthropist, a close friend of political elites, and the pride of his family. His foundation had helped countless underprivileged students complete their education, and the hospitals he funded had given hope to numerous patients. He was charismatic and generous, always impeccably dressed at charity galas, smiling warmly, surrounded by young admirers. His public image was nearly flawless. But beneath the polished surface lay a completely different Winston. He had a particular obsession, a sick pleasure rooted in control and destruction. His targets were simple: young, beautiful, vulnerable, and alone. He knew exactly how to select his prey, how to make them drop their guard, how to lure them into his world until they found themselves with no way out. Winston's hunt was never rushed. He approached his victims as a mentor, a benefactor, someone who could change their lives for the better. He offered them scholarships, high-paying jobs, and access to elite social circles. He never forced them, at least not on the surface. The girls believed they were lucky, that they had finally found a powerful figure willing to help them without asking for anything in return. They had no idea their fate had already been sealed. At first, he only offered temptations: a luxurious dinner, an invitation to an exclusive gala, a recommendation for a prestigious job. Then he gradually broke the boundaries: a lingering touch, an embrace, a kiss. And before they realized it, they were already ensnared. He made them addicted to wealth and status, made them rely on him, and just as they became comfortable, he introduced fear. He had ways to make them believe that defying him would lead to utter ruin. When the girls finally regretted their choices and tried to escape, they found themselves trapped. Winston had countless methods to silence them. He could destroy their careers, erase their social standing, or even threaten their families. He used every possible means to block their way out, ensuring that he would never have to face consequences. And even when some girls gathered the courage to seek help, the response was indifference, even ridicule. They had no evidence, and Winston was a respectable man. Even more terrifying was the fact that he was not acting alone. His friends, business partners, and the entire elite society were well aware of his actions. Some indulged in the same depravity, while others simply chose to remain silent. Occasionally, rumors would surface, but they were swiftly buried. The police would never conduct a real investigation. Journalists dared not dig deeper, and in the end, the victims could only live in silence. And so, Winston's crimes were covered up again and again, forgotten time after time. And he too continued his game, always searching for the next victim, until death finally came for him. Allison Banks was never meant to step into this world. At least before her sister Kate went missing, she was just an ordinary woman with a stable job and a simple life, never imagining she would one day descend into darkness. But when Kate's calls suddenly stopped, when the police investigation led nowhere, when everyone around her told her to let it go, she knew she had to find the answers herself. The police said Kate was an adult, free to choose her own life. Maybe she had simply grown tired of everything and left. But Allison didn't believe it. Kate wasn't that kind of person. She would never vanish without a word. Allison scoured Kate's social media, emails, and messages until she found something chilling, a photo from a party where Kate stood in the background. Next to her was a man whose face sent shivers down Allison's spine, Carl Winston. Allison didn't know who he was, but it didn't take long to find out. A business mogul, a philanthropist, a media darling, but what mattered most to her was that Kate had met him at a charity gala. After that night, Kate's journal frequently mentioned someone called Mr. C. She, described him as generous, charming, and sophisticated, yet something about him made her uneasy. The last entry in her journal, written the night before she disappeared, contained only one sentence. "I think I need to leave." Allison felt her stomach drop. She knew without a doubt that this man had something to do with Kate's disappearance. She wanted to go to the police, but she had no evidence. She considered reaching out to the media, but who would believe an unknown woman over a powerful and respected figure? There was only one thing she could do, find the truth herself. She had to get close to him, to become part of his world. Allison cut her hair, changed her makeup, and dressed in a way she knew would catch Winston's eye. She even changed her name, becoming Isabella Knox, a young, naive woman eager for new opportunities. She knew Winston wouldn't be interested in an angry sister demanding answers. But a seemingly innocent, unthreatening woman? That was exactly his type. She studied his habits, learned about his social circle, and applied for a job at his foundation. She positioned herself in places he frequented. She trained herself to smile the right way, to act like the kind of woman he'd want to notice. Then, one evening, Winston's assistant handed her a business card. "Mr. Winston finds you intriguing," the assistant said, with a polished smile. "He would love to have a drink with you." Allison knew she had succeeded. She had stepped into the hunter's sights, but she was no prey. At first, Winston behaved exactly as the world saw him, polite, charming, and utterly captivating. For a fleeting moment, Allison almost forgot her mission. But as she delved deeper, she began to see the cracks, women who cried softly behind closed doors, assistants who left suddenly, traces of something sinister being carefully erased. She started piecing things together, finding more victims, until she came across something that made her blood run cold. Kate's name, crossed out. Her hands trembled as she flipped through Winston's secret files. Then she saw the final note written beside Kate's name, handled. At that moment, she nearly screamed. The memories of her sister, laughing with her under the covers, jumping in puddles on rainy days, flashed through her mind. And now Kate was gone, probably forever. Fear, rage, and grief tore through her. But she refused to break. She forced herself to breathe, to think. If she wanted to take him down, she had to be smarter. She had to be colder than him. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. Allison wiped her tears away. Her heart still ached, but her mind was clear. She would make Winston feel fear. She would make him experience what it was like to be manipulated, deceived, and broken. She wouldn't rush it. She would take her time, setting traps, just as he had done to others. Winston had always been the predator, but now the roles were about to change. Carl Winston had never known fear like this. He was used to control, used to manipulating others, used to everyone treating him with deference. He had built an impenetrable fortress, wealth, power, social status, each layer forming his armor, allowing him to act recklessly in the shadows. But now that fortress was crumbling, and he had no idea who his enemy was. Allison Black's plan had reached a critical stage. She was no longer focused on gathering evidence. Her goal was to break Winston's psychological defenses, push him into chaos, drive him to madness, and force him to reveal his true nature. Step 1. Ghosts from the Past. A photo appeared in Winston's room. It was placed conspicuously right in the center of his desk. The image showed a young girl, smiling brightly, her eyes clear and innocent. But Winston felt his breath catch in his throat. He knew her. She was the girl who had accidentally drowned 3 years ago. When the police closed the case, he had even attended her memorial, playing the role of a grieving benefactor. Yet now her photo was here, like a silent accusation. He stormed out of the room questioning the staff, but no one admitted to entering his study. A few hours later, he had his secretary check the security footage. Strangely, during the period in question, all the cameras had mysteriously blacked out, recording nothing. His heart began to sink. Step 2. The blurring of reality and illusion. From that day on, strange occurrences began happening one after another. One night, while reading documents in his study, he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. He turned sharply, but the doorway was empty. He took a deep breath, convincing himself it was his imagination. But just as he turned back, an icy breath brushed against his neck, making him lurch to his feet, his chair clattering to the floor. Then his computer screen flickered to life. A single line of text appeared on an open document. "Are you afraid?" Winston's hands clenched tightly, his knuckles turning white. He frantically hit the keyboard, trying to close the document, but no matter what he pressed, the text remained unmoving, as if it had been carved into the screen. Finally, in sheer panic, he yanked the power cord out, plunging the room into darkness. He sat there breathing heavily. Step 3. The erosion of sanity. Day by day, his anxiety turned into paranoia, then full-blown terror. He began to suspect everyone around him. He installed more surveillance cameras, ordered his bodyguards to patrol the house all night, but still, the strange incidents continued. Paintings slashed open, a shadow appearing in his mirrors that wasn't his own, and worst of all, a new audio file appearing on his phone. He hesitated before pressing play. The recording was filled with soft, muffled sobs. Girls crying. His pulse pounded in his ears. He stopped sleeping, dark circles forming under his eyes. He became irritable, lashing out at his staff for the slightest mistake. Even his assistant, who had always been loyal, noticed the change. "Sir, are you feeling unwell? Maybe you should—" "Get out," Winston roared, hurling his glass across the room, shattering it against the wall. The assistant immediately fell silent. Rumors began circulating. The once composed, ever-confident Carl Winston was now a man on the verge of collapse. Step 4. The final night. That night, a storm raged outside. Winston sat alone in his study. Lightning illuminated the room in erratic flashes, the rain pounding against the windows. He took deep gulps from his glass, trying to steady himself, but when he set the glass down, he froze. A letter had appeared on his desk. The envelope was red, so vivid it looked like it had been soaked in blood. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single sentence. "Are you ready to confess?" At that moment, a deafening clap of thunder shook the house, and the lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Winston's breathing turned ragged. He scrambled to his feet, but he could feel it. Someone was watching him. He turned around. In the pitch-black room, A figure stood there, silently watching him. The storm raged through the night, lightning tearing apart the darkness. Carl Winston's mansion stood isolated amidst the tempest, like a forgotten tombstone. Inside the study, he gasped for breath, his heart pounding so violently that it felt as if it would leap out of his chest. The eerie red envelope was still clenched in his hand, his fingertips drained of all color. He tried to steady himself, but fear coiled around his nerves like a venomous serpent, suffocating him. He abruptly looked up. A girl stood in the room. She wore a pure white dress, her bare feet pressing into the carpet. Her damp hair clung to her pale face, and in the darkness her eyes were deep and hollow, lifeless. That face. Carl's blood ran cold. Impossible. She was already dead. "Brother!" The girl's voice drifted through the air, light and distant, like an echo from another world. Winston staggered back, his spine slamming against the bookshelf, sending a cascade of books tumbling to the floor. He struggled to focus, to see clearly, but the vision before him wavered and distorted like a nightmare. His mind screamed at him that this couldn't be real, yet fear had devoured all reason, flooding every nerve in his body with a single command: run. "Are you afraid?" The girl stepped forward. Winston's breathing turned ragged. His heart felt as if an invisible hand had seized it, squeezing tight, sharp pain, suffocation. He wanted to speak, but his throat was locked, unable to form a sound. The girl took another step, the corners of her mouth curling into an eerie, unreadable smile. "I'm back." His wildly beating heart suddenly stopped. His body betrayed him. His knees buckled, sending him crashing onto the floor. His trembling hands clutched at his chest, his face drained of all color. Agonizing pain tore through his heart, and cold sweat drenched his forehead. He tried to call for help, but only a weak, strangled sound escaped his lips. The girl drew closer, closer, and closer. And then Carl Winston's world shattered. His consciousness collapsed. His body convulsed once before falling still. His lifeless eyes remained wide open, frozen in terror and despair. A moment later, silence reclaimed the room. Allison stood motionless, gazing at the man on the floor. The smile on her face faded, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. Slowly, she reached up, peeled off the contact lenses, and removed the carefully applied skin wax, revealing her true face. She looked down at Carl Winston. His chest no longer rose and fell. His lips were slightly parted, as if trying to grasp onto the last thread of life, but in the end he had been consumed by his own fear. She crouched beside him, leaned in close, and whispered softly into his ear. "Game over." She moved quickly, putting on gloves before opening a bottle of medication on the desk, scattering a few pills onto the floor, and placing the empty bottle in Winston's hand. The window was half open, allowing the rain to be blown inside by the wind, dampening the carpet. She gently adjusted the window, ensuring it remained slightly ajar, making everything appear as though Winston had overdosed alone in the night, collapsed, and met an unfortunate end. Carefully, she wiped down every surface she might have touched, checking for any suspicious traces. Then, without making a sound, she left the room, walking down the familiar hallway toward the back door. Her heartbeat was steady and firm, each step meticulously planned. She knew this was a race against time. She had to disappear before anyone discovered the body. The darkness cloaked her escape as she moved through the rain, vanishing into the night, away from the mansion that had haunted so many nightmares. The police investigation initially progressed slowly. Winston's death was preliminarily ruled as an accidental overdose. The mansion's security footage showed no suspicious individuals entering or leaving that night. Given Winston's long-term use of sedatives, along with the presence of his prescription medication in the study, everything seemed to be in place, leaving no apparent loopholes. However, the case did not fade away so easily. The autopsy report revealed a small, yet unusual wound, a knife wound, non-lethal, but oddly out of place. This detail prompted investigators to reassess Winston's cause of death. Meanwhile, a janitor discovered a black leather glove soaked in rain near the back door of the mansion. Forensic analysis extracted trace amounts of DNA from the glove, and the results were clear. It didn't belong to Winston. A tiny mistake buried in the chaos had finally begun to surface. The arrest took place in a small hotel in Paris, France. When the police broke in, Allison was sitting by the window, a cup of cold coffee in her hand. She did not resist, nor did she show any surprise. She simply closed her eyes gently, as if she had been waiting for this moment. She was extradited back to her home country, and the case quickly became a national sensation. The prosecution accused her of being a cold-blooded murderer who deliberately approached Winston and carried out a meticulously planned killing. The defense, on the other hand, sought to prove that her actions were not mere murder, but an act of revenge, an ultimate retaliation from a victim who had suffered for years. The trial officially began, with the courtroom packed to capacity. The flashes of reporters' cameras lit up the room continuously. The prosecution first presented the evidence, a black leather glove left at the crime scene, containing Allison's DNA, along with records of her purchasing specific drugs before the incident. Everything seemed to point to the fact that her actions were premeditated. This was not an impulsive killing. It was a carefully executed hunt. However, what truly shocked the courtroom was the unexpected arrival of a witness, a middle-aged woman who walked to the stand with determined eyes. She trembled as she handed over a thick stack of documents, and her first sentence made everyone hold their breath. "I was one of Winston's victims." Her testimony brought a dead silence over the courtroom. She vividly described how Winston had used his status, wealth, and influence to manipulate and torment young, helpless women. They were pushed to the brink, losing their lives, their dignity, while the high society around them chose to turn a blind eye. As she spoke, one by one, more victims and their families stepped forward. Their eyes were filled with anger, pain, and sorrow. Their voices turned the courtroom into a giant echo chamber, each word exposing the darkness hidden beneath Winston's glamorous facade. Public opinion became divided. Some argued that Allison was still a murderer. No matter how despicable her victim was, the law should not be overridden by personal will. Others supported her, believing that her actions served justice, avenging those who had been silenced for years and had no means to fight back. After long deliberation, the jury finally reached a verdict. The judge slowly opened his mouth and began to read the final decision. At this moment, Allison's fate was sealed. Was justice truly being served? Allison was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The iron door slowly closed behind her. She did not struggle, nor did she cry out. She simply sat quietly in her small cell, gazing at the narrow strip of sky outside the window. Her health had deteriorated rapidly during the trial, and the doctors said she might not live another 10 years. But she didn't care. Her actions had exposed the truth. Winston's name was no longer a symbol of philanthropy, but a mark of predation. His family was disgraced, and the elite circles that once protected him found themselves under the harsh scrutiny of the public eye. Most importantly, no new victims would fall into his trap. She had ensured that, and for that alone, it was enough. The families of the victims carried on with their lives. Though they had finally received long overdue justice, the wounds in their hearts remained unhealed. Some chose to forget, some chose to move forward with resilience, while others remained trapped in the agony of the past, unable to break free. Winston's once grand mansion was eventually sold at a significantly reduced price. A new owner moved in, but no matter how much time passed, the house remained shrouded in shadows. Locals still whispered about that fateful winter night, as if the fear of that evening still lingered in the silent air, refusing to fade away.